in a home league, because you have less roster spots and you can't clog the whole back half of your roster with handcuff running backs. You still want some of those handcuffs, but you can't draft 5 of them in a row starting in round 10. Like, it's just going to make it tough on you. I'll be honest, I love when I'm coming away with 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds, but I get an elite wide receiver.
Final preparation to help you win your home league this season. That is what we're doing today on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dwain McFarland of Fantasy Life. And we're going to dive a little bit into some of the content that he has published over the last couple of days, but we're going to keep it kind of sneak peek, keep it upper level, but we are going to give away our favorite tips to help you win your league this season. I also will be posting the link in today's show notes direct to that article, because we know a lot of people play on different platforms, different sites, Yahoo, ESPN, Sleeper, all the different ways you can play your redraft league. So Dwain has a lot of individualized information in that article to go along with those particular sites and the ADP and so on, those places. But Dwain, before we reveal all the information to help people win their leagues, how are you feeling today? We just, before starting recording here, we were chatting for a little minute, Adam Thielen heading to the Vikings, but it is that time of year where, as you're like talking, recording, you're like, am I missing something? What, like, you either want to be drafting or catching up on news. It's a busy time.
It's a very good time to be drafting because it'll take a little bit, right, for folks to catch up on the news. So it's kind of funny with this one. My partner, Ian Harditz, and I, Ian works over at Fantasy Life with me. We do a lot of these real-time sports drafts in the Fantasy Life Championship. I mean, named for Fantasy Life. So we draft a lot over there. And it's a 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, 1 tight end, full PPR format. So actually a lot about what we'll talk here. It's funny. That league drafts closer to a home draft than a lot of other mid and high stakes places that I play. It's a really interesting dynamic. I mean, like, a lot of people take will take their second quarterback in round 11 or 12, things that you see like in home leagues.
Yeah.
We haven't quite figured it all out yet as to why those things happen, but we really try to, take advantage where we can. But where I was going with it was 2 nights ago, we did a draft and we got to the end of the draft and we had gone with a hero running back. Our second running back was David Montgomery. And then you know how you do. You pile on the running backs in like rounds 10 to 14. And then we got to a point where, like, and they don't stop taking running backs over there on that site. Like, they will pound running backs. I mean, you'll be taking guys you might take on Underdog or on DraftKings in round 20. They're taking them in round 14 there. So you have to go ahead and get them in. But what that means is there's this pocket of wide receivers that also gets pushed to the end of the draft. And so we had our list, and Troy Franklin has been one of them, but we'll just kind of set that one aside. But Jalen Coker was a big one because we knew that there was this potential for Adam Thielen to be traded. And then we had another one, which was Alec Iomanner. We thought maybe a surprise cut with Van Jefferson. That didn't happen. But the other one was Isaac Tesla. And we just really felt that based on the news and information we had, how well Tesla had played, the draft capital they had traded for this guy, 2/3 plus swapping thirds this year, even though not a great college profile. Like, Tesla's a really interesting player, but just setting that aside, when you're getting someone around 17 or 18, like, they're going to be on the field in the Lions offense, and Tim Patrick got traded. So we the other one that we did was Harold Fannin Jr. because we just felt Deontay Johnson's probably getting cut. Are we really that worried about the guys after Tillman and after Judy? It felt like if that move happened, it potentially opens up this hybrid role really for Fannin, right? Where he gets to play from the slot, gets to play in 12 personnel. You get some contingency upside with David Njoku. So I love this time of year because of that stuff. And if you can kind of try to read the tea leaves, and you're not going to get them all right. In that scenario, we got pretty lucky. We got 3 of 4 calls right. Yeah. One of them went against us. But even if you get one of those calls right, if you get 2 of those calls right, it's just an interesting twist at this time of year to really try to throw on top of things. So yeah, this is one of my favorite times as the rosters all tighten down.
And for people like yourself or myself who are drafting almost all year round, like, there is a real adrenaline hit when some of those like moves happen that can set the players up. So there is that part.
And it moves the board around. Yeah.
It shuffles everything around. Yeah. And the other side of that is if you are drafting this weekend, it may change those ADPs because somebody who was a priority for you 3 weeks ago may now be like, 5-6 rounds higher, depending on what position they are playing. If we're looking at Bill down in Washington, he's moving up faster than anyone that we can imagine. But in terms of, like, it's a good starting point because you mentioned some of the higher stakes things. I do a lot of drafts over at the FFPC, and then like it is completely different because I got a lot of people reaching out in the last week, like, you know, are you doing more home draft stuff? Because we do a lot of stuff, dynasty or best ball or higher stakes. So this is obviously a key part of like fantasy is the home leagues. My home league draft is actually coming up this Saturday. So you want to get the differences and set your mindset up in a different way, because it is completely different depending on the platform and the format. What are some of the key differences that you have seen heading into kind of this season to get people's mindsets? Maybe they are only playing in home leagues, but maybe they are playing on different sites as well. Because like you said, you're like setting yourself up in those drafts to draft against people who are drafting all summer long pretty much versus when people are coming in with their sheet or their app and they're saying, I'm going to try and draft these guys in this one league.
Yeah. So what I would say is this, because I'm like you. I mean, I do play in 4 home leagues, but I play, you know, in 250.
Yeah, it's like the question comes up at your home league. It's like, how many drafts have you done this year? And you're like, you know, 400.
I know. And then you have to explain best ball because a lot of them don't know what it is. We think that everyone knows what best ball is, but we really live in this small best ball bubble where it's like it's a 20-80 rule. 20% of the players are buying 80% of the entries. So when you look at home league, number one, what I would say is there are certain concepts that are just still constant, no matter what platform, whether you're playing high stakes, whether you're playing best ball, whether you're playing in a home league. And, you know, the first thing is just understanding, you know, your positional supply and demand. Like that's like golden rule number one. The first thing I'm sure you get these questions all the time as well. And it's like, hey, do you like this player or this player better in round 1? Do you like this player or this player better in round 2? Yeah. And my first question back is always, how many starting wide receivers do you have? How many flex players do you have? Because if you're in a league that's full PPR that starts 3 wide receivers and has 2 flexes, the supply and demand dynamic around wide receivers dramatically changes versus a lot of home leagues are still set up to be 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, and 1 flex. So that's the first thing I ask. Okay. Yeah. So if you're playing in a league where you only have to start 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and 1 tight end, that immediately opens up the opportunity to be more aggressive with the onesies. It makes me much more willing to be at the end of round 2 and say, I'll just take Josh Allen. And then I might even take, you know, Trey McBride in the 3rd round because I know I'm going to be able to come back. But the second part of this is understanding the average draft position, and the ADPs are so much lower on a lot of the players you're used to having to spend up for over at FFPC, over at Real Time Sports, over at Underdog. Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden. These guys are all going 3-4 rounds later. Travis Hunter going 2 rounds later. A lot of the rookies, especially value on the rookies, folks are just, you know, home league drafters still haven't come around to this idea that there's so much value in rookies. In these higher stakes drafts and over in best ball, we're seeing the market slowly adjusting to that over time. I still think there's value there, but right, it's starting to squeeze. Used to, we got all of these rookies, even on those sites, we would get them in rounds 8, 9, and 10, unless you had a guy like Jamar Chase. But even remember his rookie year, because people thought
the ball wasn't the same as the college ball.
He couldn't catch the ball. He fell. I remember getting Jamar Chase that year in rounds 4, 5, and 6. Based off of that silly news. Setting that aside, though, the point being in your home leagues, there is so much value with these rookies that you can really pound, honestly, like between rounds 7 and 9. So those are important things to remember. But positional supply and demand, if you do play in a league that's starting 3 wide receivers and 2 flexes, number one, what I would say is you're probably also playing in a sharper league. Because if you got a bunch of league mates that have agreed to play in that kind of league, that also means they probably really care about fantasy football. They're probably doing a lot of research. They're probably not going to draft from the queue on ESPN or Yahoo. They're going to have research. They're going to have a cheat sheet. They're going to have something they're following from whatever, you know, fantasy analysts or multiple analysts, or maybe they're putting together their own stuff. But the bottom line is they care. So you need to understand the kind of league you're in. But once you've done that and you've thought about supply and demand, it just comes down to these value pockets based on ADP. At Fantasy Life, I'm sure you guys have something too, but over at Fantasy Life, we've got an ADP tool that you can sort any way you want, but we've got all the home leagues in there: ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, CBS. But what's cool is we have right next to it Real Time Sports, FFPC, Underdog. So you can do a consensus,
Okay.
or you can just use it to compare and contrast like very quickly and be like, oh man, like some of these guys are going a lot higher over here in these leagues where there's been way more drafts with a lot of players that have a lot of skin probably in the game already. So that's kind of a cool concept. But again, it's about those value pockets. And a lot of there's just so much more value, to be honest, in the home leagues. Like if you're drafting right now at Real Time Sports, you have to take Trevion Henderson in round 3. In a home league, he's still actually going in round 5. I advise people if they want them, just don't worry too much about ADP. Just take him in 4, but don't reach 2 rounds. But on Real Time Sports, if you don't take Trevion Henderson in round 3, you don't get him. Now that's a choice. You may decide you don't want to, but you at least know like what you have to do. So, and then the last thing, which I would say, which obviously applies everywhere, it's all about draft capital allocation. If you spend picks early on a position and you invest heavily in a position early, you want to invest less in that position later. So really you're putting all those 3 concepts together are really what helps you formulate your draft plan. So if you think the best value based on the site you're drafting at is really a wide receiver pocket from round 6 to 9, well, that may say, okay, maybe this is a year where I take 3 running backs in the first 4 rounds, and then I come back to the wide receivers, or I make sure I go superhero, get 2 running backs in the first 4 rounds. And that's the final thing I'll say. In home leagues, people still draft the running backs really early, right? So just depending on how you feel, how comfortable you are going with a 0 running back build, meaning, you don't draft any. I know there's a more technical way, but let's just say you don't draft one in the first 3 or 4 rounds. Like that's 0 in a home league. Like if you don't have a running back by round 4, that's the equivalent of 0 in a home league. But I really like hero and I like superhero this year. Superhero is actually my favorite build in home leagues.
I do think, like you mentioned, with the positional settings, we might get into some roster construction elements in a second, but the league being, let's say, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex, huge. It really does allow you to do what you said, to price up at the running back position and really kind of knowing where, and even knowing like a lot of the thing about home leagues versus the leagues we're playing online is, a lot of the tendencies off your league mates as well. So like it's not a case that like it's the first draft that if you are a 0 RB drafter that they'll be seeing you go that way. Maybe if you haven't done it before, it will be. But the side eyes over the years get less and less, and they're like, that guy he drafts all the wide receivers. But you're able to kind of see the pockets and know their tendencies as well. But some of the areas I do think that really differ is if you're playing online, and if you're not, you can obviously disregard this, but the stuff you're talking about, the rookie stuff, and maybe knowing positional values or trying to take the rookies, like even in a home league, you'll see some of those rookie running backs even fall a little bit further, I think, because people want to get the established names at the top. So a lot of the things that we were talking about maybe in best ball or high stakes redraft leagues maybe 3-4 years ago, they're starting now to kind of trickle down into the home league conversation. Whereas like the rookies have continuously climbed every season as being a real edge in the higher stakes leagues. Whereas you're mentioning there's still something that people are like, they want to see that year 1 production before they want to buy.
Yeah, they want the certainty, so they're unwilling to lean into actually a lot of the edges in fantasy, like around ambiguity and those things. The beauty is, in those leagues, you don't have to attack those edges as early. You actually get to wait and still attack the edges. So that's the major adjustment that you have to make. If you go into your home league and you've drafted 150 best ball teams and you've drafted 20 high stakes teams, you really do need to change gears, or what you're going to do is leave tons of value on the table. You're going to end up taking all these players way too early. Take them around early if you really want them, but you don't have to take them Eka Ibuka in round 5. That's where this man is going in high stakes drafts. That's where he's going on Underdog now. He's going in round 9 right now on ESPN. You want to grab him in 7? I'm fine, but you don't need to take him in 5.
Yeah, that's exactly. And that's more for the people who are doing a lot of drafting to not overpay and try and balance that out. The other thing I would say for people, you can say if you disagree or agree, but like you mentioned on Fantasy Life, the same on RotoViz, you can go in and check the FFPC ADP and like using that to your advantage to see where like some of the players that you should be drafting, you're like, this guy's ADP's 4 rounds later. Maybe that means that the guys who are
real quick, guess where Trevion Henderson's going right now on ESPN?
Has to be above 7. I'm going to guess 605.
He's pick 51.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, depending on how big your league is, a lot of home leagues are 10 team, right?
Yeah.
So that's the end of round 5. If you're looking at him over on Sleeper, pick 48. So almost the same. Now he's trending up. He's up 3 spots on ESPN over the last week.
Come on.
He's up 6 spots. Yeah. And then pick 64 right now on Yahoo. So the way I look at him is my advice has been take him in round 4. If you're playing in a 12-team league, that's 48 picks at the end of round 4. Take him in round 4. And I don't care if you're at the first of round 4, middle round 4, late round 4. If you really want Trevion Henderson, you need to do it there. And what's funny is it doesn't just stop with him. Omarion Hampton's pick 40 on ESPN. Omarion Hampton is almost pick 39 over on Yahoo. So you're talking about 2 guys that you're getting either at the end of round 3 or somewhere in round 4 that are going, sometimes at the 2-3 turn in high stakes drafts.
And that also feeds into the onesie part. We'll get into the roster construction part now. And if you wanted to get a Brock Bowers or even if you want to go down as far as George Kittle, but Trey McBride would be obviously the second tight end going off the board. But when we look at those names and then you're able to get those running backs in round 4 or 5, if you want, I think it makes a lot of sense to go in those directions as well. But the other part is there's not as much essential need maybe in those leagues, because you mentioned like Harold Fanning earlier, like those guys are going to probably go undrafted, in a lot of your
you'll
leagues.
be able to get them on the
so you are going to be able to kind of, I feel like you may be able to outsmart your league mates in certain positions as well when it comes to the onesies, and same with the quarterback position and how they value some of those guys that maybe are going in the mid-range that you could put in and kind of try and replicate some of that. So when we're looking at the roster construction, though, the onesies that you mentioned, are you thinking that people should be paying up for those guys this year based on it? Let's say they only can start one of them, and then there's only one flex, or is it a case that kind of part that I mentioned, you could actually have an edge on your opponents by like not paying up at that position and getting something similar later on?
I really do think you can go either way. One of the things I've adapted about my home league strategy, just, over the years, if you wait at one of those positions, it's actually okay to take 2 of them later because the waiver wire is so plentiful.
Yeah.
And so maybe if you don't take the dual threat quarterback, which I love taking in round 3, in my home leagues, like I've targeted Jalen Hurts, I've targeted Jaden Daniels. I mean, I target those guys in all the leagues because they're basically, you've got a round and a half almost, in my opinion, this year of guys that we could actually say in a lot of years would be first round fantasy picks. So basically to the middle of round 2.
Yeah.
And depending on what site you're on, like on ESPN, like that's Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr., you can still get in the middle of round 2. You've got Achane in round 2. I know he's dealing with the calf injury, but we've got Drake London in round 2. So once you get past like that tier of players and you get into the second half of round 2, and you start to get into names where you like them, but you have question marks. You're like, I like T. Higgins, but he ran super hot in touchdowns. Will the Bengals offense be the same as last year? We've seen over 5 years, T. Higgins has been a bit of a, he's been hard to pin down. Like he's been really good 2 years and then 3 other years, not so good. So if you want to just bank Josh Allen at that point, like I don't blame you, you know? And then you could turn around and you could come back in round 3 and you could take, whatever running back it is you want. You could even just go ahead and take Omarion Hampton there. He normally goes at the end of round 3. So I think there's a lot of options, but I think the dual threat elite quarterback is my favorite in that range this year once you get towards the end of round 2 and coming into round 3. And the reason why, it's not just because, we like how many fantasy points they're going to score. It's also that we know they're going to score them. Like it's so hard for these dual threat quarterbacks to fail or for to bust. Like there's close of a thing you get in fantasy football to a lock. And so you're just locking in those points. And then, because these other positions fall and you're getting more value, that you can still offset it. I will say this. If you try to go Josh Allen and come back with Trey McBride in round 3, I think it's possible, but you need to be someone that's really, and if you're listening to this show, you're already one of those people. You can't fall asleep at the wheel still. You need to be thinking multiple steps ahead in your draft. You need to be looking at your tiers. You need to be looking at the people behind you every time you pick. And, so like if you need, whatever, you need a wide receiver and you see there's, 3 left, and they all need wide receiver too. Like, don't wait too long. Take the wide receiver then, so you're always balancing those sort of things out. And you really, I think, have to be diligent about that if you take 2 onesies in those first 3 rounds. I don't advise it if you're in a 3 wide receiver league. And if you're in a 3 wide receiver with 2 flex, I don't advise it. I think you can squeeze 1 in, but I wouldn't do 2.
Let's say when we're on that, just because some people may be in leagues where that is, like, and that sort of league, particularly if we're, and most leagues now are PPR, but if it is half point PPR or standard, that might tilt it a little bit towards the running back position, obviously. But when we're into, like, 3 wide receivers as a starting and then 2 flexes, or even a 2 starting wide receiver with 2 flexes, I would be leaning much more in those directions, just in case people are listening and they're in those leagues, leaning much heavier towards the wide receiver position earlier. Would you be in the same boat, even in home leagues?
And the running backs this year, just because the running back profiles that we have in rounds 1 through 4. Now, there's certain ones I'm not targeting in that area, guys. You can check the article out over at fantasylife.com. It's completely free. But I mean, I'll share some of the names. Like, I want to target Trevion, we've already mentioned. I want to target Kenneth Walker. I want to target RJ Harvey. There's certain guys, though, in that range that you'll see I have as fades. So it's not just, I'll take any running back in those ranges. What we want are the young ascending profiles that we know they're the explosive playmakers. They give us the ability in the pass catching game. There's a big list of them this year, to be honest, where in some years, it's like, you're forcing up some running back that you just think is going to get the touches. And, that's why you're taking them. That's not the profile that we're necessarily looking for. We're looking for some of these talented players, and they're falling into this range. So, I mean, coming away in the first 4 rounds with 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs in those formats that we just talked about, I love. And then really pounding the wide receiver value after that. I mean, because there's just so much of it from rounds, 6 to 9 on ESPN, Yahoo, and Yahoo a little less. The receivers go a little earlier, and it makes sense when you got a guy like Matt Harmon, leading, your fantasy content. People like wide receivers because they listen to Matt and he does really good analysis. But if you look over on Sleeper, you can, go more that style, that 2-2 to start. On Yahoo, you might want to go more of a hero, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers.
The other thing as well, for people who are drafting in some of the formats we talked about earlier, like, you're looking at, there's a kind of a sweet range between maybe 4 and 8 for a lot of interesting wide receivers. But, you have it marked out here in the article as some of the options going around 7 through 9. But you are, like you mentioned, Ibuka, you get into gold, and I know Jacoby Myers is looking for a trade, but he's in that area. John Jennings also looking for a trade, but he's in that area. Chris Olave, but like that 4 to 6 where you get like McMillan, Worthy, Williams, Pickens,
Pearsall's in there too.
Yeah. There's just
4 to 6 is amazing,
just,
man. McMillan, Worthy, JMO, Pickens, Travis Hunter, Calvin Ridley. I mean, that's a really sweet spot. And then you turn around and you get another sweet spot from 7 to 9. And I know you said we didn't have to name the players. I don't mind. Our article's up for free. You guys can still go check it out. It has all this stuff together. And I'm going to be updating it. V2 will drop this Friday, which will have all the tweaks for the news over the last week that some of it we touched on to start the show. But that 7 and 9 range, you mentioned a lot of those guys, but mainly it's the rookies in that range that get you super excited, like the Igbukas and Matthew Goldens and the year 2 player, Ricky Pearsall.
But when that is the part, like, if you're looking at where these players are going, and like in an Underdog Best Ball Mania draft, you're like, I need to have all the wide receivers in those opening rounds. It does free you up to really attack either the onesie positions or the running back positions. When, like, often you're looking at those 4 through 6 where you're like, these guys, there's a lot of question marks, and not the type of question marks that we want to target. Those guys, for your average home league drafter, are going to have question marks, but the question marks are loaded with upside in every direction where you're looking at those question marks. So I think that, like, loading up on them is something that, even if you do take wide receivers early, you want to still be focused on those names. But if you can start yourself off, and let's say you get a Jaden Daniels, or you mentioned Josh Allen earlier, like, there is those detours, because for a long time we had talked about like late round QB, and I think in a lot of scenarios that still makes sense. But when you look at the floor and ceiling of those Russian quarterbacks, like, it's just not replaceable later on when you look at like the first 3 names in particular, and Daniels, Allen, and Jackson. So,
and last year we had Jaden Daniels, who was really kind of a skeleton key to waiting, and you still potentially land you a dual threat quarterback. We didn't know for sure, but we knew he checked the traits, right? He checked the trait boxes. And we don't have that this year. Like, sure, you can wait on Justin Fields. He's going to run around guys, but like, we're praying he throws for 3,000 yards. Justin Fields is kind of like the old the olden days where it used to be you had one guy like Justin Fields in the league, and you're like, oh, well, he could actually offset a good pocket passer. And yes, he can still do that. But what he cannot do is offset Jaden Daniels. He cannot offset Jalen Hurts. He cannot offset Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. They're just on a whole nother level from him. So, yeah, waiting this year for the dual threat, we just don't have the option like we did last year. I do think we have some options at tight end, though, that I get really excited about this year instead of quarterback.
So we might tease them in a minute, but they are in the article as well if you want to check that out over in Fantasy Life. You have touched on a few of them. You mentioned the superhero RB or the hero RB, and I do think in your home leagues, getting that established running back. And when you're looking at zero RB, which is the direction like that I would love to go, I do think this year the profiles that are going in those first couple of rounds, but then really when you get into I think like the names are interchangeable, but like if you have two running backs through 7, let's say, like I think you could call that a superhero build, and it could be that you have Travion Henderson and RJ Harvey. There's a lot of ways I think you can do it without having one of those guys in the first 2 rounds. But when you look around and let's say you want to go through your first 8 rounds of a draft, what do you think is the ideal draft strategy? Because I think this year the actual landscape changed a lot because of last year's results and outcomes, where the veteran running backs stayed very healthy and had a lot of success. And now you look at like that we'll see how that plays out again this year, but that has set up the ADP market in a certain way. The running backs, the rookie running backs in particular, was such a strong class that some of them are going relatively early. When we're in here, they're still going too late, but you also have a lot of those guys then that are going a lot later because of how big this class was in general. What are you thinking overall as the kind of perfect sweet spot here for the home league draft?
Yeah, I want 2 running backs before 7. And 7, there are guys I like, but I'd rather them be my running back 3, in a home league, right? Because you have less roster spots and you can't clog the whole back half of your roster with handcuff running backs, right?
Yeah.
When we're playing over at FFPC Real-Time Sports, we got 20 spots. We can just fire away, and then we can still circle back and grab other kind of pieces that could move, that we could potentially flex in our flex option on bye weeks. You don't get that in a home league. A lot of these leagues are drafting 14, 15 rounds. So
you need starters.
You got to think, you still want some of those handcuffs, but you can't draft 5 of them in a row starting in round 10. Like, it's just going to make it tough on you. So I like having 2. I'll be honest, my favorite drafts right now, and it's not every site, but I would say on ESPN and on Sleeper, I'll be honest, I love when I'm coming away with 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds, but I get an elite wide receiver. So from middle position, that means you start, with CeeDee Lamb, right? Or maybe you start with CMC and you come back and you get Brian Thomas Jr. Okay. So I'm wanting one of the receivers I really like, and I want one of the running backs I really like. And then really I let value kind of dictate what my next move is going to be. But a lot of times I'm sitting there in the middle of round 3 and it's like, okay, well, here's Omari and Hampton. Okay, I'm going to take him. And then it comes back to me in round 4 and I'm like, here's Travion Henderson. And I look at it, I'm like, I can take George Pickens here, but I can take Jameson Williams the next round. Like, there's this long flat tier of these guys we like. And oh, by the way, I can still then turn around and in the next round, I can get a Travis Hunter. I can get a Xavier Worthy. Maybe I take Tet McMillan, in round 5. So there's just so many of these wide receivers that I like that I think are kind of interchangeable. I felt really good coming away even with 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds. But I will say this, I think you can build, if you're smart and you're just kind of staying a step ahead, you can really build your team any way you want this year. I really do believe
I think that's almost the key takeaway. I feel like this year you can really, something that I've talked about for years is like back to front drafting, where like know your ADP, and like you talked earlier about knowing what's coming around. Yeah.
Yep.
But you and the article have like gone through the different sites and the first 10 rounds and how it could potentially look out. And I do think people like, this year is a perfect year to be like, I'm in this point here, but what does this like Jenga piece mean if I take this player here, and what happens then, in 2 rounds time? And I do think getting to like knowing what could happen, like being 2 steps ahead, is going to allow you to build like a super team this year in home leagues.
In the article, what I think honestly to me is one of the most helpful pieces. I do walk through those examples on each site, and I show you guys what a hero running back build could look like, what a superhero running back build, and squeezing in an elite quarterback or tight end into what that might look like. And then I show you what just a normal superhero running back build might look like. I know, sorry, off brand. I didn't show a zero running back. Sorry. I need to add one just as a hat tip to you guys. But in the home leagues, I'm a little less likely to go zero. At least this year, I'm more likely to go hero. But I think one of the most useful things is there's a set of guidelines in there, and it's just a table for you guys, but it helps you do what Colm was just talking about, which is if you do this, you need to now be thinking about this. Okay, now you did this, and you need to be thinking about this. So I really broke it down into 3 round segments. If in the first 3 rounds, like you go hero running back, I really think there's 5 different ways you could go in rounds 4 to 6. And you can just look at this table and you're like, okay, the way the value fell, I actually went with option C. I went with this hero running back build that's option C, where I took 2 wide receivers in rounds 4 to 6, and I got my quarterback. Jalen Hurts fell to me in round 4. I took him, then I turned around and I took 2 wide receivers. Then it tells you what you should be thinking in round 7 to 9. Now, they're guidelines, guys. It's just basically to help kind of give you some bumpers so you don't shoot yourself in the foot with your roster build. But at the same time, you're still looking at your tiers. So for example, in that build, what it will tell you in rounds 7 to 9, I really do also think this is a year where you can almost draft your starting lineup. There's a lot of years where it's not always like that, but just the way ADPs are falling. But what's interesting about this build is it says, okay, then if you've done that, you're going to take the best wide receiver or running back left available, or the one that you think maybe the other position you're weaker at. And then you're going to get your quarterback and tight end. But if you're sitting there and the quarterbacks and tight ends you're thinking about are Caleb Williams and Drake May, and then let's say you're also willing to take Justin Fields, and maybe there's another guy that you like as well. And let's say it's coming back to you in round 10, and you're picking from the 3rd spot, and you look behind you and both of those teams already have a quarterback. You can go ahead and pass it, even though this says in round 9, like you're probably grabbing your starting quarterback and tight end. You can say, you know what? Looking at this, I know they're probably not taking a quarterback. And even if one of them does, I'm still getting one of the quarterbacks that I want. That means I can squeeze in one more running back or wide receiver right here. And that's the sort of thing. So they're guidelines, but you still really want to pair it up with your tiers.
Absolutely. So we are going to finish it there for this edition. I will link it in the show notes so you can check out the article. As Dwayne mentioned, it is free over on Fantasy Life. We aren't going to give away all the player targets. You give away a lot of them on this show. They can check them out in the articles I mentioned, but we are going to come back with another show where we talk about some of the biggest hits at the rookie position this season, which is going to pair in very well with what we talked about today, and people can try and draft those guys as well. Dwayne, it's been a pleasure having you on for this one. Of course, you can find Dwayne over at Fantasy Life, as we've mentioned a couple of times, but you can follow him on social media at Dwain McFarland. We are going to be right back, so make sure you subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get it once it is available. My name is Colm Kelly. Check me out on socials at Overtime Ireland, and until we're back, have a good one.